Good afternoon. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I am delighted to be here with you today for this museum moment. So this is a week where we're exploring education and looking at kind of the impacts on education. And in thinking about education, we decided to look at one of our major institutions in Milwaukee, something that worked and educated thousands of Jewish Milwaukeeans, Washington High School. Within the museum itself, when we talk about Washington High School, it becomes part of a larger story that we share about public education and the role that public education in America played in making sure that students, that American Jewish students, were becoming part of they were becoming Americanized. And Jewish parents were really invested in, especially early Jewish immigrant parents were really invested in public schools as a way for their kids to learn how to be American. And Washington High School comes as this kind of bastion of what that looks like for a good 50 years of Jewish Milwaukee history. So jumping into their story, I'm just really excited I had the opportunity to start this story. I reached out to their Alumni Association and to their archivist historian, Linda Durrenberg, and she has been so helpful that there's so many things that I'm fairly confident that there will be at least one more, if not more, Washington High School segments on museum moments. I can tell you for sure we're going to be focusing on some art and architecture pieces in a future piece because I just didn't have the time to get to them today. Today, I really wanted to focus on its history and how it was founded and what happened and its development. And so let's jump into Washington High School. And that way, please, if you're watching and you're an alum of Washington High School, like my husband, Mitch Nellis, let us know what year you graduated. Give us any stories about the principals. It seems like it was a very stable organization in its first 60, 70 years. There were really only 3 to 4 principals. And it's just interesting to see how it grew and grew and grew. So Washington High School was founded in 1911. And interestingly, in 1908, in the space that Washington High School is on Sherman Boulevard, that was not even part of the city 3 years before its founding. But as the 2 other high schools in the city had grown, and at that point it was North and West Division High School, they decide we need to have another high school. So the original buildings of Washington High School look like this. They were called the barracks. You can see they're pretty primitive. They're wood. These are some of those early classes. And it starts with a class of 88 freshmen and 3 teachers and 1 principal. And then as the next year rises, they add another class of freshmen. So you have freshmen and sophomores. So the first class from Washington High School did not graduate until 1915. That's also when it gets its name. The building that you see here was built in 1913. So it comes a little bit after that barracks building. I believe the barracks were still in use for a while, despite the fact that the building was built. This little article says 1915 class gives Washington's name. Where did Washington High School get its name? Have you ever thought of that? Of course, it was named after the father of our country, but why, where, how? In 1911, Washington High's first freshman class entered, and the school hadn't been named yet. I think at that point, they kind of had thought the other high schools in the city were named geographically. So maybe Washington High School would be Northwest High School. At a class meeting, one freshman or person who started with the freshman class, Miss Evelyn Purdy, discussed and voted on various names, and one of the rejection ones names being Sherman High School. Miss Purdy spoke in favor of the name Washington. With cooperation of the school board, the name was finally chosen, not only because it was close, because Washington High School is close to Washington Park, but also because of the high set standards which the name implied, which I love that there's this sense of if we are being named for the first president of the United States, then that's the standard to which we should arise. These are some images of the inside of Washington High School. And I really, at a future date, want to focus on some of these pieces. Through the 20th century, there was this kind of recognition that what you had gained from the school and to provide a class gift. So there's all sorts of really intriguing and really beautiful artwork within the school, some done by students, some done by very famous artists. In fact, there was a great news story a couple of years ago about a famous Swedish artist who had pieces in Washington High School that ended up going for over $700,000 at auction to support scholarships for the school, for students to go to college. So kind of an amazing story. But I just love these little details, how the Art Deco pieces, the tiles, which were class gifts, and that kind of just the artistry in this old school. Washington High School, at its kind of zenith, had over 3,000 students, and in fact outgrew the building, and needed to create an auxiliary space. They also had all sorts of times in which they had people graduating at different times of year to maximize the space. They had a morning class that would go on in one part of the space. They would have an afternoon in another part. In another space, people would bus between these spaces. It was a really complicated process in the 1960s. The other thing about Washington High School to recognize is that it was integrated in 1928, and it served a broad swath of the community. Many of the alums are Jewish, but many of them are also Catholic, Protestant, African American. And today, Washington High School is a technology school and actually has committed itself to programs in how to design apps. There's a robotics program. So it's a really interesting school that still exists, that continues to kind of evolve and change to the needs as addressed in the city. There are many famous alumni. I'm just going to start with this one. This is a picture of Bud Selig and Herb Cole. They actually graduated together from the class of 1952, I believe. And Bud Selig, in an interview, said Washington High School in those days was rated as one of the best high schools in America. It was a really, really good school. I look back on those days as really important, wonderful. It was also a really tough school. I found Washington High School tougher than the University of Wisconsin. And this is a picture from the 75th anniversary of Washington High School in 1986 of Bud and Herb together. This gives you a sense of some of those kind of famous alums. The picture here is a yearbook photo of one Jerry Silberman, otherwise known as Gene Wilder. He did drama at Washington High School, among other things. But the other alumni include actor Tom Laughlin, who was in the Billy Jack movies, Newton Minow, who is the father of Social Security, Gerald and Nat Hiken, who wrote for television, Marjorie Reardon, who is a movie actress of the 40s. You've got radio actresses. Christopher Gardner was the subject of the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, which Will Smith was in. You have a senator, Herb Cole, who graduated from this school. You also have a governor who didn't make my list, Governor Dreyfus was an alum. You have an NBA basketball star in Latrell Sprewell. So, I mean, it really is the school that just has produced massive success in a number of different arenas. And they, in fact, have a Hall of Fame, which is what you see on the bottom line here. And each year they elect new people from different classes into the Hall of Fame, to kind of give a sense of this. With their 100th anniversary, they inaugurated an alumni room. So they're really trying to reclaim their history. And you can find all sorts of really interesting pictures on their 100th anniversary website, including things which show, you see kind of how the school has taken this legacy of, say, a divided basketball court and made it into 2 basketball courts today. But, you can see how that used to work, where you could open things up, and that's where they would have had proms. When Linda and I were talking, she described the swimming pool, which was in the basement, and now they have a beautiful Olympic-sized swimming pool. But in the original building, it was a very small swimming pool. They won many championships in swimming, despite the fact that their swimmers had to work things out in this tiny pool, back and forth, back and forth. So in thinking about Washington High School, I think, and in thinking about this institution, I like to think about how much it gave to the community that it was in and how much it continues to give. I also think there's this sense, Washington High School's mascot they might be, and you guys can look this up, I have no idea. They might be the only school in America that their mascot is the Purgolder. So the Purgolder is for purple and gold, their school colors. or their mascot is actually Willie the Wildcat. Sorry, but they're the Purgolders, and they were picked as the Purgolders because that was a regal color. That this was the color of royalty, purple and gold, and so it gives you this sense of self of the school. And I love this. We have a lot of people who have been putting up their names. My mom graduated. Steve Aronson said that his mom graduated in 1964. And Susie Ettinger's mom graduated from Washington High School. Robin Cohen graduated in 65, and both of her parents went. And she even had some of the same teachers that her parents had. Amazing. That kind of residual generational knowledge being imparted. Schools are such an intrinsic part of how we engage with our community. I know as a parent who's been dealing with homeschooling through the pandemic, it's been really hard to not have my school community, to not have that space. And so it's really interesting to see what this space meant to this community for so many years, and how it continues to be a big support in the northwest side of the city today, in the Sherman Park neighborhood. This museum moment is brought to you, as always, by Jewish Museum Milwaukee. If you like what we're doing, please feel free to drop by our website, jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. Feel free to give us a donation. Tomorrow, we're going to be examining something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about quotas and admission quotas to universities and professional programs in the in higher education. And we're actually going to be joined by a special guest. His name is John Pollock. Some of you might have seen him before at the museum talking about scrap. And he's going to share with us some insight that he found about UW-Madison and how that relates to the broader academic landscape. So join me tomorrow at 2:00 on Facebook Live, and we'll be talking about quotas. Thank you so much for all of your sharing, Linda and Susie and Robin and Susie. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks so much.